The jungle doesn't care about Christmas. It doesn't care about the presents still waiting in Lima, about the family reunion in Pucallpa, about the fact that today, December 25th, 1971, is supposed to be a celebration. The Amazon doesn't negotiate. It simply exists, dense, ancient, indifferent. And on this particular morning, somewhere in a stretch of Peruvian rainforest so remote, it has no name on any map, a 17-year-old girl opens her eyes. She is alone. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know how long she's been unconscious. She can barely see. Her glasses are gone, lost somewhere in the sky. Her right collarbone screams with each breath. One of her sandals is missing. Her sundress, the one she wore for the holiday trip, is torn and soaked. And somewhere above her, tangled in the canopy of trees she can't quite focus on, is the seat she was sitting in less than 24 hours ago, still attached to 2 other seats. Still wearing the seatbelt she never unbuckled. She fell from approximately 3,000 meters. The plane she was on, LANSA Flight 508, no longer exists. It broke apart in a thunderstorm over the Andes and scattered across 40 kilometers of Peruvian jungle. 92 people were on board. Search teams will spend weeks looking for survivors. They will find exactly one. Her name is Juliane Koepcke. She is a biologist's daughter. She has spent years in the Amazon. And over the next 11 days, every single thing her father ever taught her about the jungle will be tested, not in a classroom, not on a field trip, but in the most desperate, disorienting survival situation a teenager has ever faced and lived to describe. This is the full timeline of how she made it out. To understand how Juliane Koepcke survived 11 days alone in the Amazon, you first have to understand who she was before the fall. She was born in Lima in 1954. The only child of 2 German scientists, Hans Wilhelm Koepcke, a zoologist, and Maria Koepcke, an ornithologist. Both were researchers at the Natural History Museum in Lima. Both were deeply serious about the natural world. And when Juliane was a child, they did something unusual. They moved the family to a remote research station deep in the Peruvian jungle called Panguana. Juliane didn't grow up with television or shopping centers. She grew up with the sounds of the rainforest at night, with the rhythm of tropical rain on a tin roof, with the names of hundreds of bird species and the habits of river fish and the particular way light filters through a triple canopy at midday. Her father taught her to move through the jungle without panic. He taught her that streams flow downhill, and downhill leads to people. He taught her that the Amazon is survivable if you respect it. She was a biologist's daughter in the truest sense, trained without knowing she was being trained. Panguana was not a comfortable posting. Located in the Huallaga River Valley, deep in the Peruvian Amazon, the station had no electricity, no telephone, no road connecting it to the outside world. Supplies came by boat. The nearest town was hours away. For a child, this was simply life. But it was a life that required fluency in things most people never learn. How to read the sky before a storm. Which plants hold water. How to move through undergrowth without thrashing. Without exhausting yourself against terrain that will always outlast you. Juliane absorbed it all without labeling it. She wasn't studying. She was just living where her parents lived. Her mother, Maria, was a particular kind of scientist, meticulous, disciplined, and deeply in love with the natural world. She had co-authored one of the definitive field guides to Peruvian birds. Her father, Hans, was the same. A man who trusted observation over intuition, who believed that the correct response to the unknown was careful attention, not reaction. Juliane grew up between these 2 people. Their habits of mind became her habits of mind. But she was also 17. She had just finished high school. She was excited about Christmas. She had been fighting with her boyfriend. On the morning of December 24th, what she wanted most in the world was to get to Pucallpa in time to spend the holiday with her father, who was already waiting there. Her mother, Maria, was traveling with her. That detail matters, because what Juliane would carry with her through 11 days of jungle heavier than the fear, heavier than the pain, was the knowledge that her mother had been on that plane, and that she had no idea what had happened to her. She was prepared for the jungle in ways most people never are. She was completely unprepared for what she was about to experience. That gap between knowledge and readiness is where survival stories live. December 24, 1971. Lima's Aeropuerto Internacional Jorge Chávez. The terminal is busy with holiday travelers, families loaded with gifts, workers heading home. The kind of crowded, cheerful chaos that airports generate at Christmas everywhere in the world. Juliane and her mother Maria are among them, 2 passengers on LANSA Flight 508. A Lockheed Electra turboprop bound for Pucallpa, a city on the edge of the Amazon basin. The flight should take about an hour. LANSA, Líneas Aéreas Nacionais, SC, was one of Peru's domestic carriers. It had a troubled record. The airline had already lost 2 planes in crashes in 1966 and 1970, killing dozens of people. But in 1971, passengers had limited options for reaching cities like Pucallpa, and LANSA was still operating. The aircraft that morning was carrying 92 people, 86 passengers and 6 crew. Among the passengers were a group of young people traveling together for the holidays. There was a festive energy in the cabin. Juliane remembers the flight beginning normally. The weather was a different matter. Peru's rainy season runs from November to April, and December 24, 1971, was deep inside it. The sky over the Andes that afternoon was building into something serious. Towering cumulonimbus clouds, the kind that generate extreme turbulence, lightning, and violent updrafts. Weather like this is dangerous for any aircraft, but particularly for a propeller plane flying without the altitude ceiling of a modern jet. The captain's decision to depart into that weather would later be questioned. But the plane took off. What the passengers didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that LANSA's safety record was not simply a matter of bad luck. The airline operated in a regulatory environment where corner cutting had consequences that were slow to accumulate and fast to kill. Maintenance protocols that didn't quite meet standards. Routes flown into marginal weather because schedules had to be kept and tickets had already been sold. The Lockheed Electra they boarded that morning had already lived a full life in other hands before it became part of LANSA's fleet. None of this would have been visible from the passenger cabin. It never is. People board aircraft trusting that someone in authority has verified what they cannot see. For the first part of the flight, things were manageable. Then the turbulence started. Juliane remembers the cabin beginning to shake. She remembers the Christmas cake that someone had brought on board, sliding off a tray. She remembers passengers gripping their armrests. The nervous laughter that people make when they're frightened but don't want to show it. She remembers the lightning outside the windows. Not distant flickers, but close, brilliant, immediate. The kind of lightning that illuminates the inside of a cloud and makes you understand, viscerally, that a plane is a very small thing in a very large sky. She remembers her mother turning to her and saying something that has stayed with her for 50 years. That's the end. Maria Koepcke had seen something outside the window. What, exactly, Juliane never knew. Then the world came apart. HOUR, 0 December 24, 1971. Approximately 12:42 p.m. A lightning strike hits the right fuel tank of LANSA. Flight 508. The explosion is immediate. The plane doesn't gradually lose altitude. It doesn't give its passengers time to brace, to pray, to say goodbye. The fuselage tears. The wing separates. In seconds, the aircraft that was carrying 92 human beings ceases to exist as a single object and becomes a cloud of debris falling through a tropical storm at 3,000 meters above the Peruvian jungle. Juliane is still in her seat. The seatbelt she never thought to unbuckle, the seatbelt she'd kept on through the turbulence, is the only thing that keeps her connected to a row of 3 seats as the aircraft disintegrates around her. She and 2 other passengers, still strapped into their connected seats, separate from the fuselage, and begin to fall. She has no memory of the fall itself. What she remembers is the moment before, the roaring, the spinning, the cold air replacing the pressurized warmth of the cabin, and then nothing. She loses consciousness somewhere in those 3,000 meters. The seat row falls in a spiral. Later, investigators would theorize that the particular aerodynamics of 3 connected aircraft seats, falling together, created a spinning motion that slowed the descent just enough, combined with the dense jungle canopy below, acting as a natural cushion to make survival possible. It is not a miracle in any mechanical sense. It is physics, terrible, precise physics. She hits the canopy. The vegetation absorbs some of the impact. She continues falling through layers of branches until she stops. She does not wake up immediately. When she does the next morning, Christmas Day, she is on the jungle floor. She does not know how many hours she has been unconscious. She does not know, at first, where she is, or how she got there. The process of understanding takes time. The mind, after a trauma of that magnitude, does not present facts cleanly. It offers fragments: the smell of wet earth, the sound of birds, the weight of something wrong in her right shoulder that gets worse each time she tries to move. She lies still for a moment and takes inventory. This is, in retrospect, a remarkable thing to do: not to thrash, not to scream, but to assess. Her right collarbone is fractured. She will discover this slowly as her body reports its damage in waves. She has a deep laceration on her right arm, already tender and weeping. Her left eye is swollen, nearly shut. Her glasses are gone, and without them, the world beyond arm's reach is a blur of green shapes and filtered light. She is wearing one sandal. She is also, she realizes, still in her seat. Or rather, still strapped into what was her seat. The 3 connected chairs came to rest on the jungle floor, with her in them, seatbelt intact. She unbuckles it now, carefully, and stands. The 2 other passengers who fell with her in the connected seats are dead. She can see them. She does not look for long. The jungle around her is vast green, and absolutely silent, except for the sounds it was making before any of this happened. Birds, insects, the drip of rain off enormous leaves. The storm has passed. The sun is somewhere above a canopy, so thick she can barely see the sky. She is alone in the Amazon. She is 17 years old. She has a fractured collarbone, one sandal, no glasses, and a wound in her arm that is already beginning to concern her. And she has to make a decision. Day 1, Christmas Day, 1971. The first instinct for most people would be to stay put. To find the crash site, to wait for rescuers, to hope that the noise of search planes would eventually reach her location. That's the logic of survival training for open terrain. Stay visible. Don't exhaust yourself. Let the rescuers come to you. But Juliane had grown up in the Amazon. She knew something that most survivors in that situation wouldn't. In dense jungle, aircraft can fly directly overhead and see nothing. The canopy is a ceiling that hides everything beneath it. Waiting was not a strategy. It was a slow death. She started moving. Her first priority was to find the crash site, not because she expected comfort there, but because she knew there might be food, water, or other survivors. She spent the first hours after waking searching the immediate area, calling out. Her voice disappeared into the trees. She found some Christmas candy and a small bag of Christmas cake that had survived the fall, still in its packaging. She ate carefully. She drank rainwater collected in plant leaves. She found no living survivors. What she found instead was what the crash had scattered: luggage, seat cushions, fragments of the aircraft. She found a small bag of hard candy, more than she'd started with. She was methodical about it, moving in expanding circles from where she'd woken up, cataloguing what she had. Decision point 1. She chose to search rather than collapse. To inventory rather than grieve. Her scientific upbringing was already functioning as a survival tool. Observation before emotion. By the end of day 1, she had a small supply of food. No real shelter, though. The jungle canopy kept the worst of the rain off, and a forming plan. She remembered what her father had told her during their years at Panguana. If you're ever lost in the jungle, find a stream. Follow it downhill. Streams lead to rivers. Rivers lead to people. She needed to find water. On day 2, she heard it. The faint sound of running water, somewhere to her left. She pushed through the undergrowth, toward the sound, and found a small creek, barely a meter wide, running clear over smooth stones. she followed it. This was decision point 2. The choice to move, to follow the water downstream rather than wait at the crash site. It was the decision that would ultimately save her life. The creek was slow going. The jungle floor was tangled with roots and fallen branches. She couldn't see clearly. Her collarbone made every step that involved balance or catching herself on a branch an exercise in controlled pain. She wore her one sandal on her right foot and left the other bare. The sandal didn't fit the left foot comfortably, and she quickly learned that bare feet, on this terrain, gave her better grip. She moved through the days carefully, methodically, measuring distance not in kilometers, but in hours. Then she looked at her arm, and her blood ran cold. Day 4. The laceration on her right arm had been manageable. At first, painful, but clean-looking. By day 4, it wasn't clean anymore. She couldn't see it well without her glasses, but she could feel the heat radiating from the wound. She could see, even blurred, that something was moving inside it. Maggots, blowflies in the Amazon can locate an open wound within hours and lay eggs. The larvae hatch quickly in the heat and humidity. The infection risk is severe, but paradoxically, maggots also consume dead tissue. In historical medicine, they were sometimes used exactly for this purpose. What Juliane was experiencing was both dangerous and, in a terrible way, survivable. But she didn't know that. She only knew her arm was infested, the wound was worsening, and she had nothing to treat it with. She kept moving. Days 5 and 6 were the hardest of the journey. The creek had grown slightly. It was accumulating. Water from smaller tributaries, but the jungle around it hadn't thinned. If anything, the vegetation near the water was denser, more tangled. She was moving maybe 2 to 3 kilometers a day, slower than walking pace, fighting through undergrowth that grabbed at her ankles and branches that seemed designed to catch a person without depth perception. The candy was nearly gone. She was rationing 1 piece per rest stop, but the supply had a clear end, and she could feel the weakness beginning. Hunger in the jungle is a strange thing. The heat suppresses appetite, but the body burns energy constantly. Sweating, fighting infection, forcing its way through terrain that resists every step. She felt light, not in a good way. Nightfall in the Amazon is absolute. When the sun drops, the canopy becomes impenetrable darkness. She would find a spot slightly elevated above the waterline. She knew enough to avoid sleeping on flat ground, where water could collect, curl up, and wait. Sleep was intermittent. The sounds of the jungle at night are not peaceful if you are alone in it. They are constant, overlapping, impossible to interpret without being able to see. She thought about her mother constantly. Juliane Koepcke had been sitting next to her daughter when the plane broke apart. Juliane had searched the crash site. She had not found her mother, not among the dead she had seen, not among the wreckage. She held on to this fact, the way a person holds onto a rope in water. She did not know what it meant. She chose to believe it meant something hopeful. There is a particular kind of mental discipline required to survive what Juliane was living through, and it is not bravery in the conventional sense. It is closer to compartmentalization, the ability to put certain thoughts in a closed room and not open the door. Every time the image of her mother surfaced, sitting beside her in the plane, turning to say those final words, Juliane redirected. She thought about the stream. She thought about the next bend. She thought about her father in Pukelpe, who was waiting, who did not yet know what had happened, who would be looking for them. She used him as a fixed point. He was real. He was somewhere. She moved toward the idea of him. This is something survivors describe again and again. The importance of having a concrete reason to keep moving. Not an abstract will to survive, but a specific face, a specific place, a specific task. For Juliane, it was her father, and the stream, and the next hour, and then the hour after that. On day 7, she heard something that stopped her completely. An engine, somewhere to the north, a search plane. She looked up through the canopy. She could see nothing. She screamed until her voice gave out. The engine faded and disappeared, and the jungle resumed its indifferent noise. And she sat down on a root and allowed herself, for the first time, to cry. Then she stood up and kept walking. Day 9, morning. The creek had become a proper stream now, maybe 3 or 4 meters wide, running faster than before. She was following it faithfully, hour after hour, 1 foot in front of the other. Her arm was worse. The wound had a smell she didn't want to think about. She had no food left. She was running on water and stubbornness and something else, something harder to name. A refusal, not optimism, exactly. Optimism implies believing things will go well. This was something more stripped down, a refusal to stop before she had a reason to stop. She had no reason to stop. On day 10, the stream joined a slightly larger river, narrow enough to wade across, but moving with real purpose now, cutting through the jungle with the confidence of water that knows where it's going. She followed its left bank, staying as close to the water's edge as the vegetation allowed. Then, on day 11, she saw the boat. It was pulled up on the bank. A simple wooden canoe, the kind used by local lumber workers and fishermen throughout the Peruvian Amazon. Next to it, a path, a narrow path, cut through the jungle with a machete, the kind of path that means people come here regularly. She followed the path with her heart hammering. The hut was small, 1 room, a thatched roof. Inside, basic supplies, tools, a container of gasoline. The gasoline, she remembered, suddenly and completely, something her father had told her years ago at Panguana, that gasoline could be used to kill maggot larvae in an open wound. He had explained it matter-very-factly, the way he explained everything about the jungle, not as horror, but as information. She had filed it away with hundreds of other pieces of information, and never expected to need it. She needed it now. She used the gasoline on her wound. It took a long time, she counted. She removed approximately 35 maggots. The pain was significant. When it was over, she was shaking, but the wound was cleaner than it had been in days. Decision point 3. She treated herself before waiting for help. She used the knowledge she had rather than conserving her strength. The treatment would prove critical, the wound. Left untreated for even another day, could have progressed to a point where it threatened her survival. She found a covered area in the hut, lay down, and slept deeply for the first time since the crash. This was the turning point, not a dramatic moment of rescue, but a small wooden structure, a container of gasoline, and the memory of a father's voice in a research station years ago. She was still alone. But for the first time in 11 days, she was somewhere. Day 11, evening. She had been in the hut for hours, resting, when she heard voices. 3 men appeared on the path. Lumber workers who used this hut as a base camp during their work in the area. Guillermo Badajoz, along with 2 colleagues, had arrived to spend the night before continuing their work the next day. When they saw Juliane, they stopped. She must have looked extraordinary. A young woman, alone, her arm bandaged with materials from the hut, wearing a torn sundress and 1 sandal, in a part of the jungle that had no business containing a 17-year-old German-Peruvian girl. She identified herself in Spanish. She told them she had been on the plane, the LANSA plane that had crashed on Christmas Eve, the one that was all over the news. They had heard about it. Everyone in the region had heard about it. They took her in. They fed her. They gave her a place to sleep that night, a real roof over her head, the first since the crash. Guillermo Badajoz later described being unsure at first whether she was real. A girl appearing alone from the jungle, in that condition, with that story, seemed like something that didn't happen. But she was real, and she was coherent, and she spoke Spanish, and she knew the name of the plane. The next morning, they arranged for a local man named Marcio Rivera to take her by boat to a settlement called Tornavista, a journey of several hours downriver. She sat in the boat and watched the jungle pass on both sides of the river, the same green walls she had been fighting through for 11 days, now slipping past effortlessly. The river was wide here, moving with authority. She had followed its tributaries to this point. Her father's instruction had been correct in every detail. From Tornavista, a local pilot flew her to Pucallpa in a small aircraft, her first time back in the air since the crash. She did not record what she felt during that flight. Some things resist description. She arrived in Pucallpa on December 31st, 1971, a week after the crash, 11 days after she'd been on a plane that exploded in the sky over the Andes. She was taken to the hospital immediately. The medical team that treated her found a fractured right collarbone, a badly infected right arm wound, swollen eye tissue, and significant dehydration and exhaustion. She was malnourished but ambulatory. She was coherent. She had walked out of the Amazon under her own power. In the hospital, she received the news about her mother. Maria Koepcke had survived the initial fall. She had been found at the crash site, but she had died there. Several days later from her injuries, before rescuers could reach her. She had not been far from where Juliane woke up on Christmas morning. After her recovery, Juliane guided rescue teams back to the crash site. She was the only person who knew exactly where it was. The teams found the wreckage, confirmed the death toll, and recovered remains. Of the 92 people on LANSA Flight 508, Juliane Diller, now Juliane Koepcke by her married name, was the only one to survive. In the decades that followed, Juliane Koepcke built the life she was falling toward when the plane broke apart. She completed a biology degree, then a doctorate. She became, like both her parents, a field researcher, a mammologist, specializing in bats of the Amazon. She returned to Panguana, the research station her parents had built and she had grown up in, and spent much of her career there. In 2011, she published a memoir, When I Fell from the Sky, that described the crash and survival in her own words, carefully, without dramatization. She gave interviews over the years. She spoke about the experience with the same scientific clarity she brought to her research. She did not perform her trauma for audiences. She described what happened, what she did, and why with the detached precision of someone who had always been more interested in understanding things than in being understood. The crash changed her relationship with flying. She flies when she has to, for fieldwork, for conferences. She does not particularly enjoy it, but she goes. What happened to LANSA is a footnote that matters. The airline was shut down in 1972, following a third crash that year that killed more than 40 people. The decision to fly into severe weather on December 24, 1971, was not an anomaly. It was the continuation of a pattern of corner cutting that regulators eventually could no longer ignore. Aviation safety in Peru, and in much of the world, is measurably safer today, partly because of disasters like this one. The cost of that learning is staggering. But the learning happened. Panguana still exists. It is now a biological reserve, officially protected. A legacy of Hans and Maria Koepcke's work that outlasted the tragedy. Juliane has dedicated much of her professional life to its preservation. She has watched it grow from a jungle clearing with a tin-roofed research station into a documented ecosystem of extraordinary biodiversity. It is, in a real sense, the place that saved her, because everything she learned there, in the years before the crash, was what she carried into the jungle on Christmas Day. 1971. Juliane has spoken carefully about her mother. Maria Koepcke survived the fall. She lived for several days at the crash site. She died there, alone, waiting for help that arrived too late. She had not been far from where Juliane woke up on Christmas morning. This is the grief that Juliane carries, not the 11 days in the jungle, but what she learned when she got out. Lesson 1, practical, follow the water. Juliane's father gave her the single most important piece of survival advice she would ever receive. Years before she needed it, streams flow downhill, and downhill leads to people. This is true in most wilderness survival situations. If you are lost in the jungle, or in almost any forested or wild terrain, finding moving water and following it. Downstream is almost always the right decision. It gives you a navigation direction, a source of hydration, and the highest probability of finding human settlement. Every extra hour you move reduces your chance of dying in place. Lesson 2, psychological. Knowledge doesn't expire. Juliane didn't plan to use what her father taught her. She didn't study survival techniques in preparation for a crash. She simply absorbed information about the world around her over years of living in it, And when she needed that information, it was there, including, at the most critical moment, the knowledge that gasoline kills maggot larvae in an open wound. You cannot know in advance which piece of knowledge will save your life. But the act of paying attention to the world of treating information about your environment as worth keeping is itself a survival strategy. Lesson 3. Human, the refusal to stop is a choice. On day 7, Juliane heard a search plane and couldn't signal it. She sat down and cried. Then she stood up and kept walking. That moment, the crying and the standing back up, is the whole story compressed into 60 seconds. Survival in extreme circumstances is rarely about physical superiority or special training. It is about the decision, repeated dozens of times over days, not to stop. That decision is not automatic. It is made consciously, again and again, in the face of evidence that stopping might be reasonable. Juliane made that decision every single day she was in the jungle. She made it 11 times. If this story stayed with you, if there's a moment from Juliane's 11 days that you keep thinking about, the comments are open. This channel exists to reconstruct these timelines as accurately and respectfully as possible. If you want to follow more stories like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next episode goes deeper into the Amazon and farther back in time.